Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm so thrilled you're joining us. We've got an incredibly fascinating topic lined up today, and we're going to break it all down using our source materials. We're looking at Austria's rapid and honestly often contradictory journey. We'll trace the path from the absolute ruins of World War II, straight through an unprecedented industrial boom, and finally to the awakening of one of Europe's strongest environmental movements. It's a story of massive progress, sure, but also of fierce resistance. And as always, we're going to look at the whole thing completely objectively, sticking straight to the facts. Let's get right into it. So, how did a toxic armaments plant become the ultimate symbol of Austria's transformation? Well, to answer that, we have to rewind to 1944. We're focusing on the Moose Bierbaum plant in Lower Austria. Now, this wasn't just your run-of-the-mill factory. This was a massive, highly toxic armaments plant run by IG Farben. They were using some pretty innovative but incredibly dangerous chemical processes to churn out aviation fuel for the Nazi war machine. It was literally a place built for destruction. But exactly here, in this incredibly grim setting, a profound transformation took root. And it started with a few incredibly brave people. Okay, let's dive into Section 1, Resistance and Destruction. To really understand how modern Austria was shaped, we've got to look at this hyper-local but massively significant network that was operating right in the shadows of the Moose Bierbaum refinery. Right inside that plant, the Austrian Freedom Front, specifically the Moose Bierbaum group, began to form. And the most crucial thing to understand here is the sheer diversity of this group. You had political prisoners from the Stein Penitentiary, Catholic priests, and forced laborers and POWs from over 20 different nations. And get this, they were working side by side with local farmers and even the plant's own security personnel. These were people who, under normal circumstances, would probably never have crossed paths. But they united with one incredibly dangerous goal: to overthrow the regime, carry out sabotage, and prevent any further destruction from the war. But the story of this group is deeply tragic. Throughout 1944, they were actively building their network. Then, in the late autumn of that year, the Gestapo managed to infiltrate the group with a spy, using the codename Paul Weismeier. That betrayal led to a massive wave of arrests on January 16, 1945. Over 200 members were rounded up. Many were deported to the Mauthausen concentration camp, and on April 27, 1945, literally just days before the camp was liberated by U.S. troops, 40 members of this incredibly courageous group were murdered in the gas chamber. It's an unimaginable sacrifice, and one we absolutely have to remember when looking at this history. Just a few months before the war ended, on February 1, 1945, a staggering 1,200 bombs rained down on the site. In a single day, Allied air raids completely leveled Moose Bierbaum and the surrounding area. By the time the war ended in May 1945, this once gigantic facility was reduced to nothing more than a smoking field of rubble. And that brings us to Section 2, the industrial rebuilding. We're zooming out now to the immediate post-war era. The country was in ruins, people were starving. Austria essentially had to be built from scratch out of the ashes, and that meant rebuilding at absolutely any cost. This post-war boom was driven by two massive, often opposing forces. On one side, you had the Soviet administration, which took control of over 300 industrial plants. That included the entire oil industry and, yep, the ruins of Moose Bierbaum, which the Soviets completely dismantled for reparations. On the other side, you had the Austrian government desperately trying to rebuild. In 1947, they took a massive step. They completely nationalized the country's heavy industry and electricity sectors. The sole focus? Rapid growth, production, and energy. The breakneck pace of this industrialization is just staggering. In 1947, construction started on the Reisek-Krutzek Dam, an absolute marvel of engineering, with the highest head of any power plant at the time. By 1952, Austria was literally revolutionizing global steelmaking with the LD steel process in Linz. Then, in 1955, the iconic Kaprun Dam opened, a massive symbol of Austrian post-war pride. And in 1960, OMV launched a massive new oil processing facility in Schwechat. In record time, the country transformed into a hyper-modern industrial nation. But it wasn't just dams and factories. This rapid progress completely reshaped the landscape, and farming too. Everything kicked off in 1947 with mass-produced tractors like the Steyr Type 180. Soon after, chemical fertilizers from Linz flooded the market. The impact was wild. Just to put it into perspective, tractor counts in Lower Austria skyrocketed from barely 2,900 in 1946 to nearly 100,000 by 1977. Nature was being harnessed for maximum efficiency. But as you might guess, this relentless exploitation of the environment set the stage for the next massive societal clash. And this brilliantly illustrates our next major turning point, Section 3, the awakening of environmental awareness. Because right after the industry had essentially saved the country, citizens started questioning the side effects. A brand new kind of resistance was forming, the civic environmental movement. You see, environmental awareness isn't some brand new trend. It actually started surprisingly early. Back in 1952, right in the middle of the building boom, citizens gathered 120,000 signatures to stop the diversion of the famous Krimmel waterfalls. In 1958, a huge media campaign successfully blocked an oil port in the Laubau wetlands. WWF Austria officially formed in 1963, and by 1969, the folks in Mollin voted down a highly destructive power plant project. Everyday citizens were organizing to protect nature from the exact same industrial machine that had just put the country back together. Which brings us to a name pretty much everyone in Austria knows, Zwentendorf. Approved in 1971, this was a boiling water reactor designed for 730 megawatts. It was heavily pushed by the government and the energy sector as the ultimate clean technology of the future. Zwentendorf was about to become ground zero for the battle between state-run industrial plans and citizen action. Let's turn up the heat with Section 4, Citizens Against Megaprojects. As we head into the late 1970s and 80s, these two worlds, massive state ambitions and grassroots resistance, collide head-on. The clash over Zwentendorf was nothing short of epic. The state's ambition was huge. The government was planning 3 nuclear plants by 1990 and rolling out massive pro-nuclear campaigns. But the grassroots resistance was unstoppable. Mothers, students, union workers, doctors, they all mobilized. The sheer pressure forced a historic referendum on November 5, 1978. And the result? By a razor-thin margin, 50.47% of Austrians voted against opening it. The plant was 100% finished, it cost billions, and it literally never produced a single watt of commercial power. That spirit of civil disobedience reached a boiling point in 1984, with the battle for Heinberg. Once again, plans were announced for a massive state power project, this time a huge hydroelectric dam right in a unique wetland area. But the public wasn't having it. The Konrad Lorenz petition launched to save the Danube floodplain, and in freezing December 1984, thousands of citizens physically occupied the Heinberg forest. It's a striking thematic parallel to the 1940s resistance we talked about earlier, isn't it? People putting their bodies on the line, this time not against a dictatorship, but to save the ecology. Ultimately, the project was halted, and that very area is now the Donau-Auen National Park. Just to show you the massive momentum behind this movement, the Konrad Lorenz petition gathered a staggering 353,000 signatures in 1985. It's absolute proof of the immense, undeniable power of organized civic action. So we've looked at the industrial boom and the ecological resistance, but let's bring it all back home in Section 5, the shadows of the past. Because all this rapid progress, it came with some pretty heavy hidden costs. A perfect example of this is the Mittendorfer Senke scandal in the 1980s. Imagine this, 800,000 cubic meters of illegal, highly toxic industrial waste were secretly dumped over the years, threatening one of Central Europe's largest groundwater reserves. It showed that despite all the new environmental laws, Austria was still dealing with the toxic, buried legacy of its own rapid industrial miracle. Now, what's really interesting is the ultimate fate of Moosbeerbaum, our starting point. We talked about the bombs, the destruction, the incredibly brave resistance, but what actually happened to the site? The contrast is almost absurd. The hidden reality is a heavily contaminated zone, officially known as Outlast N64, packed with toxic hydrocarbons, ruined bunkers, and flooded chemical systems. But on the surface, the wasteland was sold off, and in the year 2000, it was transformed into a pristine, lush green golf course. Local historians know that if you go there today, you can still find ruined trench shelters and even World War II gas masks. Our sources actually include an explicit warning, which translates to, for those interested, it is important that such finds remain where they are found. The history, the pain of the forced laborers, the courage of the resistance fighters, all of it is literally still buried in the ground today, hidden right under perfectly manicured fairways. And that leads me to our final provocative thought for today. We've seen how a country rose from the ashes, built an industrial powerhouse, and then learned to fight tooth and nail to protect its nature. But as we proudly look at our environmental laws and national parks, we really have to ask ourselves, as we build our bright green future, what hidden scars of industrial progress are we simply playing golf over? I hope you found this explainer as captivating as I did. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the world around you.